Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Court-Martail Podcast. Introducing your host for this evening first. He is the host with the most from the West Coast, the Bay Area Brawler, Skylar Greenberg. And his partner, he has colonized, energized, and revolutionized the podcasting wrestling world today. Your Colonial champion, Sean Cody. Welcome, everyone, to the greatest show on earth that isn't Monday Night Raw. That's right, it's the Court-Martail Podcast, the only place you can find it here on the Court-Martail Podcast YouTube channel. And this is the very first time on our live premiere we are going head-to-head with that other place that we talk about too often. This is the podcast made by Smarks, for Smarks, specifically to indulge Smarks. It is the Court-Martail Podcast, wrestling's favorite podcast. I am your Colonial champion, Sean McCarty, here today to talk about a myriad of subjects, the least of which being incredible news going on in the world of professional wrestling, theoretical returns, people who have returned, and a match that came to be a definer of its time to some. But with me by my side, my tag team partner, my partner in crime, one half of the Court-Martail Podcast Tag Team Championships. The belts are being printed as we speak. The man of the hour, the man with the power, too sweet to be sour. He is the Bay Area Brawler himself, the one, the only, Skylar Greenberg. How you doing, my man?
Look in my eyes, what do you see? A cult of personality.
That's right. Indeed we are.
Indeed we are. A cult of personality, both you and me together. And this is going to be a good show.
I'm excited, man. We're going to have a great time. We're going to have all the singing along so we don't get hit for copyright, all those kinds of things, Elfberg and more. But before we get into any of that, we have got a lot to talk about. It's been a long time since we've had one of these segments. Roll that intro, baby. Coming straight to you from the Golden Gate Garage, this is the Wrestle News with Skylar Green.
That is right, boys and girls. It is that time. It is the news of the week with the Bay Area Brawler, Skylar Greenberg at your service. And boy, my man, do we have a lot of things to talk about.
We sure do. What do you got?
Well, let's start off first in the land of Stamford, Connecticut.
Okay.
And the people who run shows on Monday that suck.
Yeah, nobody's watching because they're all busy here listening to this fantastic podcast.
Right. And on the previous Monday Night Raw on July 26th, Keith Lee lost a match to, and I quote, Karrion Kross.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, apparently, he made a very vague tweet saying, I've decided I'm just going to tell you guys the story myself. Give me a week or two.
Interesting. Now, I wonder if that means he's going to dip or if he's just headed back to NXT to cut a better promo.
I don't know, but this is weird. Like, Keith Lee's 2021 is weird. He had that match with Drew McIntyre for the WWE Championship.
Yep.
Then got pushed to the side for Goldberg.
Yep.
Then after the Rumble was gone for like 5 months.
Yeah.
Then he comes back, wrestles against Bobby Lashley, loses to him, and then gets pushed to the side for Goldberg.
Wait a minute. I see a trend.
And then he loses the match to Karrion Kross, who lost his own match the week prior to Jeff Hardy. And it's just, I don't get it. I don't get what the hell WWE is doing with their NXT people.
Well, what's weird about this is that, what was it, like about, a month and a half ago or so, we had that news break that Vince McMahon was personally going down to the Performance Center to go analyze his new prospective talent. Must have gotten a look at Keith Lee and was impressed, got a look at Karrion Kross and was impressed, and then eventually just, once they finally got up to the main roster, just didn't give a damn. Because if this is not an indictment on these two individuals as to what Vince thinks about them, I don't know what is.
Like, I know Keith Lee, he had issues with COVID and he was gone for a while. Maybe that he's still recovering. That it could be a situation.
I mean, but he was still able to work. I can't imagine that even if he was having issues with it, that Vince would just pop him on TV. But you mentioned COVID, because I think that's a really intriguing part of this story. Have you heard about this guy?
About which part?
So the word is, the rumor mill has said that Jeff Hardy just recently, and I'm probably jumping ahead a little bit on your news, but Jeff Hardy just tested positive for COVID and was taken off TV for 2 weeks, same, as the protocol goes. And I forget who the news was broken by, somebody who was not in WWE's little inner circle, no pun intended. But the whole story of this is that had Jeff Hardy not been put in that position where he had to be taken off TV, the plan was for Karrion Kross to lose again to Jeff Hardy. And Keith Lee would not have been on the show at all, but because Jeff Hardy got substituted out, Keith Lee ended up being the cannon fodder instead.
And to me, this just all, like, remember when Malachi Black, or Aleister Black, whatever you want to call him, he had that interview and he was talking about WWE's bipolar booking and how you get told one thing, then it would get changed later on in the week. Then the day of the show, it would get changed 3 different times from 3 different people.
Yeah. I believe it.
I just don't get it. I don't get where WWE's mindset right now is in booking.
You know what I think part of the problem is, and I know this is going to be really, contrary. We said this was a podcast by Smarks for Smarks, but I'm actually going to defend Vince McMahon here for a second. And I know that sounds kind of crazy, but hear me out. So, we had 4 Hell in a Cell matches in Hell in a Cell weekend because... Who is it who got it first? Was it SmackDown got it first? Yes, SmackDown got it first with Roman Reigns and Daniel Bryan.
And then USA Network got pissed because they thought the WWE was giving Fox preferential treatment, so they wanted the Hell in a Cell on Raw.
So let me ask you this. With a room full of writers who then go up to Vince McMahon, and then Vince McMahon can say yes or no, and it's such good shit. But then, how much are these external influences playing into this booking? How much is Fox having a say in what they want, or USA having a say in what they want, or even more prevalent than that, how much is Peacock getting involved in this? It kind of feels like a lot of what's happening now with the booking is coming from 3 or 4 different sources, the least of which being people who actually know professional wrestling. And I'm not saying Vince McMahon on his own would be better. I sincerely doubt that. But...
not at his advanced age.
Not at his age.
The wear and tear on his mental capacity.
Yeah, obviously not at his age. But it also brings to question just how much is Vince McMahon to blame in a major way, without saying, obviously you could blame him for the deals that he's making, but how much is Vince McMahon to blame for the booking if that many external influences are impacting it?
Well, that's the thing, though, is that what is it that Fox and ultimately NBC Universal, the people that own USA Network and Peacock, what do they want from WWE? And it feels really bad that TV executives are meddling in this business. It feels bad we have writers who have been hired who don't know anything about professional wrestling, writing professional wrestling. The shows are unwatchable because there's no clear direction in anything. Yeah.
You know what it reminds me of, Sky? It reminds me of...
late 2000 WCW.
Late 90s WCW, right? Well, yes, WCW in general, but right as the standards and practices really started to come down and everyone other than people, the executives who actually know wrestling ran wrestling. And then, it kind of feels like when those TV guys, or better than that, Jim Herd in the 90s. In the late 80s, early 90s, when Jim Herd took over WCW as one of the first guys that Turner brought in, who just knew nothing about wrestling, had no idea, came up with the Ding Dongs as a tag team, and you hear all the time, the guy who wanted to change Ric Flair, shave his hair, give him an earring, and call him Spartacus, How different is that from some of this stuff? How different is that from Nikki ASH, even if that was Nikki's gimmick? But, genuinely, how different is it? Because this is where we're at. This is what dissuaded a lot of people and why AEW is, say what you want about their wrestling program and the people running it, but that's why they have momentum now, and WWE really does not.
And it feels weird because you would think AEW would just... I'm waiting for the shoe to drop with them. People, they either don't know, or they just we know this is not the best show, but it's more entertaining than WWE, and that's an indictment on WWE.
Yeah, no, it really is. Considering what AEW actually, the schizophrenic booking that it has, and just the all over the place nature of the show, where you can glean some good things from it, but it's just buried in filler.
Right, and I don't know whether or not AEW is the solution to professional wrestling that it was when it was presented.
Yeah.
But it's going to continue getting popular if WWE keeps putting out the quality product they are putting out.
Yeah, something's got to give in WWE, otherwise AEW is going to be getting a lot more than... Well, we're going to get to that in a second.
But anyways, yes, you did take my Jeff Hardy news, so I'm going to have to take that off the list.
That's okay. Well, it all is relative, so it all kind of clumped together.
But that's the whole thing, is that everything right now in wrestling is connected, and everything is kind of fluid, if you will.
Yeah, and for guys like us, where we come up and talk once a week about that, it is an exciting time in pro wrestling, because something's happening. Something major's coming. Even if it's not in the big moves, there's definitely a lot of little moves that are kind of something's coming to a head here.
It feels like either there's going to have to be a substantial change in WWE beyond what happens on screen, or AEW is going to become even bigger than it is right now, which it's a possibility as more people get turned off. I just am worried that professional wrestling is going to be killed off by its dwindling audience getting smaller and smaller.
Well, there's always that risk. It's just because of just the attitude, and we've discussed this many times, just the attitude of the boys and just the nature of the silliness of pro wrestling nowadays. And I'm not one to say that there can't be comedy in wrestling or stuff like that. I'm not Cornette. Obviously, there's fun stuff you can do with it, but there's certain things that are respectfully comical and certain things that are not. And I think that what's going to happen is, in the same way that WWE bred a generation of wrestlers who thought it was all silly and a show, AEW is going to breed a generation of wrestlers who think it's even less should be taken seriously, and we're going to see some of the most outrageous community theater, D-list acting and garbage come out of that if we're not careful and we don't get some people who actually kind of, as you say, tighten the ship up a little bit in AEW.
Fair enough. Now we're going to go to AEW, and we're done with WWE stuff.
Yep.
Although I will say I am looking forward to SummerSlam.
Me too. Honestly, they're building a card up pretty well despite their shows.
Even if we have to get another damn triple threat with Charlotte, Rhea Ripley, and Nikki Ash.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
Should we talk about the other program?
We'll talk about the other program. Now, Cody Rhodes gave an interview to Inside the Ropes, and it feels like there are so many million wrestling sites I can't even talk about it. But anyways, he goes to Inside the Ropes, Kenny McIntosh.
Yes,
to talk
I know
about
Kenny.
Sting coming to AEW. Do you want quotes or do you want the whole thing?
Whichever. Listen to your heart.
Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit because Cody talks a lot in this interview, but we'll
shocked.
Dissect everything part by part.
Okay.
So, in talking about how Sting is booked in AEW,
okay,
Sting is entirely Tony's. He let me in on the process of it, and I got to help be there to facilitate him coming to a small degree. But more than anything, I think he did that out of respect for my fandom. Sting was my favorite wrestler growing up, and he's a big part of my childhood. I'll model a lot of the babyface I'd like to be after the babyface that Sting was. So for him to be involved is what we do is massive.
It explains a lot about Cody that Sting was his favorite wrestler.
His favorite babyface wrestler.
Yeah.
Because
it says a lot about Sting. And it says a lot about Cody that Sting is his choice. And that's not a knock on Sting at all. It's just, it definitely shows why Cody's attitude is Cody's attitude.
There's a reason why the babyface dumb Sting meme is in effect.
Yeah. Yeah.
And why Sting trusting people is such a bad idea.
Yeah. And he's trusted a lot of people. He's trusted a lot of people. Yeah, and so has Cody. And,
Yep.
it's funny. So, well, we haven't seen Cody do the play kicks, but that's to say that's going to be out of his wheelhouse.
Yep. Now, on to Sting and AEW's health and keeping Sting healthy.
Okay.
The process of getting him cleared really comes down to having a great medical team. I can't say enough about Doc Samson and what he set up for AEW. I came back through the curtain after Double or Nothing, and someone handed me a bottle of electrolytes, one of the young lion type medical trainees that he always has a group of. I mean, really, I don't believe in so much that stuff. I'm a dumb old school wrestler. At least I try to pretend to be. But that's how you prolong your career. It's the ice bath. It's the kinesiology. It's the actual attention to detail on nutrition.
Wait, I'm laughing because the premise of what he just said is like, yo, our doctors are so great. I walked through the curtain, someone handed me a Gatorade. Yo, this is top-notch medical facilities here, folks. There's Gatorades here. I don't even know about electrolytes. I never even knew that Gators made AIDS, but there it was, and I just drank it. And it's like
Gator made AIDS.
this is like this is the most Cody like trying to sound smarter than he is promo. Cody's interviews, I'm noticing this a lot about Cody. He's very well spoken, but when you actually listen to what he says a lot of dumb stuff.
This is basic. Here, have a wrestling contest. Then have a Gatorade afterwards to replenish your energy.
Yeah.
God.
You went to the gym, you get a drink of electrolytes. It's like, yeah, oh man, we're keeping everybody healthy because we've all got Gatorades in the back. Man, you guys are really killing it. And I know Doc Samson is better than that.
Does independent wrestling not have Gatorades after matches? Do they give them just water?
I mean, well, if they're the ones I've gone to, then probably yes. But Cody is gonna be. This is just comical because Cody is obviously a much better PR representative and honestly should be doing all of Tony Khan's interviews where I am, just because he's a little bit better spoken and doesn't get defensive at the slightest prodding.
Now, here's the next paragraph, and if you thought that previous paragraph made Cody sound stupid,
that was funny.
Make it even worse.
That was funny. All right, go ahead.
Sting joined the healthiest company he could possibly join. And it wasn't a matter of ever getting clear. It's the fact that he got to go through his doctors and our doctors. But more than anything, I don't know if we thought Sting was going to have a match until I saw the level of intensity that was the cinematic match. That was probably more intense than an actual live match. That's when I knew, personally, he can have a match. You're only as good as your dancing partner. And when people talk about somebody who might be medically, they may have a handicap, they might have an issue, what we do, we protect that.
Yeah, I bet you do.
That's our job, is to protect that.
How many people are injured on this show right now? 10? 12?
At least 10 to 20 over the 2 years they've been running.
I mean, between Ricky Stark's broken neck, I know he's back now. Reba's hurt again. Britt
Baker's injury.
You know, it's like, and to say, and what a Cody, who's supposed to be like the model for professional wrestling, the actual professional wrestling on this show, goes, yeah, that cinematic match was better than any of the actual matches on that show, just burying the rest of the roster.
He didn't say it was better. It was more intense than live matches.
Yeah, so what does that tell you about the live matches? You know, it's like, I don't know whether he meant to say it, intent to that, but that completely buried the rest of those matches. You know, because they're trying to show off that same deal, or maybe not, but it's...
But that first sentence, that very first sentence, Sting joined the healthiest company he could possibly join.
Yeah, they've got Gatorades. I don't know what you're talking about, Sky.
and injuries every other week.
Yeah, I mean... The
wrestling style they have is way too high action, way too high impact. It shortens people's careers.
It's a difficulty of 20 with an execution of 3.
Here, let's continue with this, shall we?
Yeah, oh yes, please. Oh, we've got to... Oh, Cody, there's more. Of course there's more.
There's 2 more paragraphs.
Oh my
God.
God.
Cody on the opponents that Sting has faced. I think it's a matter of Sting having good opponents. You put Ethan Page in the ring with Sting, he's going to be just fine. He's going to be able to shine and take care of himself and give the fans what they want. That's the key. You got to have a good dancing partner, and you got to know what you're able to do. I think he's just now seeing that there's a lot under the water, the tip of the iceberg with Stinger. But if at any point that he would want to scale it back, He's still a huge part of our team. We're there. There's no pressure on him to perform. He has nothing to prove to anybody.
This man is 62 years old. It's like, obviously he has nothing to prove to anybody. He's just taking the unfathomable amount of money that Tony Khan has given him to do whatever the fuck that Tony wants him to do. He said, Cody mentioned that in the first paragraph.
And also, but if at any point he would want to scale it back, he's only had 2 matches.
Yeah, what has he done?
Cinematic.
What has he done? He's literally walked out there while it's snowing in July, looked around, beat the teetotal shit out of Scorpio Sky one week, and that's pretty much been it.
Are you ready for the final paragraph?
Yeah, I was going to say, if you need to tone it down, Sting, from walking to the ring peacefully as your people are getting kicked the shit out of, if you need to dial that back, you want to come in on like a chair or something, you just let us know.
Exactly. Cody Rhodes on a potential Rhodes versus Sting match sometime down the line. I'm absolutely adamant about wanting to do a match with him, and it's not something that's been discussed or contacted or anything like that while he's here. I still would hope that it happens. He's such a huge part of who I am, and he was such a dick to me on the second week when he showed up, and I love that. And I love his love for my dad as well. Sting is a big part of what we do. What a different company when you can have Sting there and Jack Evans in the same company. That's what AEW does better than any. It's such a diverse roster.
Yeah, because Tony Khan gets 300 wrestlers and then forgets that they're there, and then gets another 300 wrestlers and forgets that they're there, because he's too busy doing other things and just gobbling people up so they can have 3. Did you know the last episode of AEW Dark was 3 hours long?
They have too many fucking people.
They have 2 YouTube shows, and they have them wrestle pay-per-views every week. Why would you do that to yourself? It's like, it's just, they have so many people. I mean, remember when Christian was even halfway like memorable on this show, and now look what they've done to him.
I know.
It's like,
and now they're gonna have a second TV show every Friday. And
with Sting, it's like, this whole thing with Cody Rhodes and Sting is that Cody obviously is going to have to be heel for that feud. Well, even though those are tired old tropes and nobody is a heel or a babyface anymore. You know, further proving my point about the stupid shit that Cody says on these interviews.
But Sean, what if it's 2 good guys wrestling against each other and you just want to watch that match?
Well, what's the story? I respect you and I respect my dad and I used to emulate you, so let's fight.
It would be an honor and a privilege to wrestle you, Sting. Please, may I suck your dick?
Can my 34-year-old body beat your 62-year-old neck-broken decrepitness? I think I can do it, but I'm not sure, because you're 62-year-old Sting. Have I mentioned he's 62 years old?
Yes, you have, several times. Cody Rhodes is the dumbest wrestler I've ever met that's gotten to a prominent position. The difference between him and Nick Gage is that Nick Gage is stupid, but he knows he's stupid. Cody Rhodes passes himself off as a country club member, but he's so fucking dumb.
And you know what the thing is, too? This just further proves that Cody deserves no pass from anyone for being the best of the executive vice presidents or knowing how to work or blah, blah, blah. Because Cody has the same exact toxic mindset that people like Omega and the Bucks have. It's no different. It's just entitled. And really, Cody probably got worse because of those guys, but look who he immediately latched onto when he was released from WWE. That shows exactly where his mind is. And as much as Cody has been one of the better parts of wrestling in AEW, with the exception of a couple matches and a very odd promo, it doesn't excuse the fact that he is pretty much facilitating and condoning all of the other filler and garbage that goes on this show, even though he's the one who knows how to work above all of them.
But that's the thing, though, is that Cody hasn't done anything memorable besides the match with Goldust. That was basically 2 years now.
Yep, him and Dustin was good. Him and Jericho was good.
And also the feud with MJF. After that, what has Cody Rhodes actually done?
Pretty much that match with Jericho.
Yes, but the stuff with Brody Lee was bleh.
Yeah.
The stuff with QT Marshall is just
Bad.
garbage.
Bad.
Now he's on to Malachi Black, and there's promise there, but it's just Cody. This past year has not been compelling. He's not been exciting. There's nothing interesting about Cody right now.
Because Cody has done nothing differently since 2019. Like, literally nothing. He's come out and cut the same promo, done the same thing. He wrestled Shaq.
And that match, he was like the third most important person in that match.
He was the fourth most important person in that match. He was the least relevant of those four. Because they were trying to get Jane Cargill over. They were trying to get Red Velvet over because Brandy got Preganinant. And Shaq is Shaq. So that leaves Cody. And nobody was talking about Cody after that match. Just saying.
Nobody. And he I don't know. Cody Rhodes, like, the more I hear from him, the more I hate him.
The more I just realized that he's no better or different than any of the people that I continually gripe over on a regular basis. And it's just disappointing. And this interview kind of just accentuates that. He's well spoken, but the content coming out of his mouth is not good.
Right. We're going to end on this note. AEW is doing a second TV show called Rampage. This is debuting on August 13th. And the first show happens to be in the second city, the Windy City, Chicago, with a certain Punk that is rumored to be appearing there. They're also doing a show in Madison Square Garden in September 22nd, and supposedly a certain Goat Man will be appearing there.
Well, weirdly enough, I'm more inclined to believe the former over the latter. And the reason being is that I feel like Tony Khan must have just thrown as many zeros that he could at that person. And you knew that he was going to come back eventually. But what control does he have is going to be the real question.
Which one, Punk or Bryan?
Punk.
Because
I mean, Bryan too, but more over Punk. Like, I'm more inclined to believe that Punk's coming than D-Bry's coming. Just because Tony Khan, I fully believe, would throw the absolute wall to get him at this point. But the question is, what did Punk ask for? And how much is he going to be able to stay away from all of the garbage that the rest of this show has?
Creative control. You have to get creative control.
And
the ability to say yes and no to things.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would imagine somebody of Punk's stature, Punk's probably one of the few people left that could actually use that and get it.
I feel like Daniel Bryan could get it too. Like, these two guys are the biggest names not currently in WWE that's not named Brock Lesnar.
Yeah.
And they both command respect in the professional wrestling industry. But here's my thing, though. Both of them, they could come into AEW and they could certainly get a ratings pop in the initial run. But Daniel Bryan's 39. CM Punk's 43. Granted, Sting is 62, so I'm not even going to get into the ageism thing.
Yes, yeah. There's quite an aged roster on this show.
And that's another thing, too. Their roster is really, really old. Like,
old and thick.
Old, thick, and slow. Like, I know they have some young guys in, like, MJF or Jungle Boy or Darby Allin, but most of the rosters in the late 30s or early 40s, in Sting's case, 62. It's just, you're adding another old name. You're adding another former WWE guy. You're fulfilling that TNA stereotype to a T.
Oh, of course.
The only difference is that Tony Khan has endless amount of money that he can spend.
Yeah. Yeah, and his pockets are goddamn bottomless. But here's the other question to this, too, because in CM Punk's case, do we know how good Punk is going to wrestle? Is he going to wrestle? We don't know what kind of capacity Punk is going to come into. Is he going to be there full time? Is he going to get a Brock Lesnar deal? You know, and it's been what? It was 2014, so it's been 7 years. 7 years since CM Punk wrestled. Do you think that he comes back and pulls a Shawn Michaels and is exactly the same as when he left? And he wasn't really doing too great at that moment in 2014 when he did decide to leave.
Well, we have to remember that he was fighting a very, really bad staph infection.
True.
And a couple of other infections. He's probably healthier now than he was then. Like, if you've seen the pictures of CM Punk recently, he looks much better. It helps that he had that UFC training, even though he's 0-1-1 in UFC. But physically, he's gotten in much better shape.
Oh, and he would definitely get the pop, and he would definitely get news, which is really what AEW wants, is they want the attention. And both Daniel Bryan and CM Punk will get attention, but I think as far as a more mainstream deal, Punk is definitely a more mainstream name to recognize at this juncture. But like you said, how long does that last?
And more importantly, with CM Punk, what is it with CM Punk? Like, Daniel Bryan is a known commodity because we've seen him wrestle recently.
Yep.
We know he's a great wrestler. We know he's a good promo. We know he has star power. He is going to bring results. That's not a problem with Daniel Bryan.
Exactly.
CM Punk is a mystery.
Yeah.
Because we haven't seen him wrestle for 7 years. We don't know how good he's going to be in the ring. We don't know if he's training or practice. We don't know physically what he looks like. We know he's going to cut good promos, but we don't know that promo ability is going to still be there because, it goes away with age too.
It can. It definitely can. And I think a big part of it is, if Punk doesn't wrestle, then what do you have him do? Be a manager? Because all of the managers in AEW are just booked beautifully by standing there and doing nothing. Like,
it would be pointless to have him be an authority figure or a manager or the leader of a stable. It would be useless to have him be like that unless he was there to wrestle at some point.
Right. And
It's like hiring Sting to be the manager for a wrestler and have him hardly wrestle. Oh, wait.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth because I was just about to say Sting, who, as we mentioned, is 62 years old. And has
62?
Yeah.
If you kept saying 62, you knew I was going to do that.
Yeah, eventually. And yeah, but it's the same kind of deal. And I remember having the same kind of conversation. What was Sting going to do? And then we found out. So at this point, Punk's going to help the ratings, but beyond that, what's he going to do? Get into a feud with Jericho? I fully believe he's going to be the fifth labor of Jericho.
Oh my God!
And Chris is gonna suck that life right out of CM Punk, and that's how we're gonna get the tone set. I guarantee you that's the way they're gonna work this.
Oh my God, they could.
I guarantee you that's the direction they went, because that's what they like to do.
It's either that or Daniel Bryan's going to be the fifth labor, and that's just going to suck.
Yeah, I mean, but at least I would vouch for a Daniel Bryan Jericho match because Daniel Bryan will at least surefire be able to cover up Jericho's crappishness of late.
I wonder how much this is going to affect WWE. I don't know if you noticed this during Money in the Bank ladder match. Shinsuke Nakamura did the GTS.
He did. He definitely did. And I remember we mentioned that on the review, that we both noticed that. And
so I wonder how much the wrestling companies are going to play with each other on this one.
Well, and then you hear WWE in their perfect, we're going to strike back move are like, you know what, we may need to sign Braun Strowman back. Way to show him. Way to show him, WWE.
Well, maybe Braun Strowman should come out there and cut a worked promo or a shoot promo on WWE or AEW or whatever.
It's funny you say that because the reason that we're even talking about CM Punk in a capacity where many people know him is because of a worked shoot, and that worked shoot was the Pipebomb, which leads us to our topic. Our topic today, and we won't talk too long about this, is worked shoot promos in pro wrestling. They can be era-defining. They can make a character. They can make somebody, turn them, go from a regular guy to a star, as I firmly believe that Pipebomb did for CM Punk. As great a talker as he was leading up to that, nothing gave Punk the leverage of stardom quite like that Pipebomb.
And there's never been a promo like that.
No, before or since. Even though they tried to replicate it with AJ Lee.
Yeah, and that's the thing, though, is that no shoot promo afterwards matched what CM Punk's promo was.
Yeah.
Because there was a believability, a realistic way in Punk talked. He talks like a real person, which, even at the time, WWE 2011, It felt scripted as fucking
Yeah,
hell.
you could hear it. You could see it from everyone, and then all of a sudden Punk starts talking, and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, okay, something's going down here, and you could tell the tone was different, the theme was different, and to this day, I don't think there has been a promo that has been so accurate and has aged so brilliantly, quite like that pipe bomb.
Right, exactly. What makes that promo so special?
It's a lot of hard truth, and it's hard truth at a time when what was so unique about this is, yeah, we all knew that wrestling was predetermined at this point, but beyond a couple winks and nods, no one had full on gone for the jugular and meant it in a shoot capacity against the company. Like Steve Austin, you still knew that gimmick against McMahon was gimmick, as great
Right.
as it was. But Punk, you knew that every word, that was stuff that they probably did not want to get out.
Exactly. It's like, as much as Austin was the rebel rouser, he never said anything so controversial against the company that you would just like, oh my god, he should not have said that.
Which is why I think it's so ironic that CM Punk was wearing a Stone Cold Steve Austin t-shirt while he cut that promo.
It was shades to what Austin used to do, but it was CM Punk in his own way.
And right in that time, it was maybe a couple months ago that he and Austin had actually had words with each other on TV, at least. Where
and there was the tease of an Austin Punk match.
Yeah, which honestly, if there was ever one match for Steve Austin to come back for, that was probably it.
Yeah,
of
it's
anyone,
a shame it never happened.
It's a shame it didn't happen, but honestly, it's probably for the better, because it probably is better in our minds than it would have been actually out there.
Just like Undertaker versus Sting.
Yeah, exactly. And
because as we have said many times, Sting is 62
years old, indeed. And now with the Undertaker the way he is. And speaking of the Undertaker, that leads to another one. I don't know whether you remember when Taker came out in the Attitude Era and pretty much cut a promo saying, I've had Vince's back for many, many years, and now Vince doesn't have my back. And he cut a fairly sharp promo that eventually led him to really developing that Biker Taker gimmick that he had come back with, but it hadn't really established, or they hadn't really figured out why he was doing that. And then the Undertaker goes off and he gives this rant. And he does this work shoot like, I know you're looking, I know you're watching me, Vince. And and they end up working that into the him getting on the bad side of the Undertaker for a little bit, and furthers a feud later on. So there's the Undertaker, he's not one who was made by it the way that Punk was, but another person who was made by a shoot promo was Mr. McMahon himself.
Right. I mean, remember that interview? Brett screwed Brett.
Yes. And that, and I find the funniest part of that is that Vince thought that he was going to be the babyface in that situation. And that's what cracks me up about that whole deal. It's like...
Well, I mean, Vince's twisted mind, okay? Vince's twisted mind.
Yeah, for real. But that was very much a worked shoot about how the way Vince felt about Bret Hart. And it was a good thing he did it, because it ended up birthing one of the greatest gimmicks of all time in Mr. McMahon.
Exactly. Who was that guy? He was the owner of Memphis, and he criticized WWE product.
Jerry Jarrett.
Yeah. Remember when Jarrett cut those promos?
Yep. Yeah. Oh, yeah. There was those work shoots that they had Cornette do in '97 as well, where he was going after a bunch of people. They had these moments where it was like 2 to 3 minutes where Cornette just did a work shoot on whatever he was just feeling at the time. And boy, did he make a career out of that.
And just think about it. Think of the names we're saying. Jerry Jarrett, Jim Cornette, Vince McMahon, Bret Hart,
The Undertaker,
Punk, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Undertaker. What do they all have in common?
They can talk and they're stars.
They can talk, they're stars, and when they said it, they meant it.
Or at least it appeared that they meant it, but there is definitely truth behind it, and people can always detect that. But there's always a line to cross. That's the interesting thing about shoot promos. There's always a line where it gets to be too much, a la Vince Russo, a la the promo after Bash at the Beach, where Vince Russo comes out and starts saying a whole bunch of BS. You know, you won't ever see that piece of shit again, and because Hogan wants to play his creative control card. There's some things, it depends on who it's coming from. If it's the guy who's writing the show, who's booking the show, who comes out and whines, that doesn't come across as must-watch TV. That's too much revelation into the back. We don't need to know absolutely everything going on to the back to the detriment of the show. But in the right doses, can really spark some intrigue into something that's otherwise flat.
And that's the thing, is that CM Punk's Pipebomb promo, it was a legitimate shot in the arm for WWE at a time when the product was stagnant.
Yeah.
And it made CM Punk a really big star, to the point where now they try to do work shoot promos after him. And arguably, the only one that I have actually felt real was the one with The Miz and Daniel Bryan on Talking Smack.
Yeah, that one was pretty intense.
But every other one just felt like it was copying CM Punk without actually being as good as CM Punk. Like, I love AJ Lee, but her promo was nothing.
It was forced.
It was forced.
It was forced, and you could tell it was forced. And that doesn't happen with everybody, right? It's these certain instances where sometimes it's forced, sometimes it's unnecessary, in the Vince Russo case. But sometimes what happens with these work shoot promos is that nobody knows what to make of it, right? Whether it's work or not, or they don't even know. Like, just recently, I just watched Lawler and Kaufman on Letterman. And like, that obviously was a work, but like, to this day, there are people who aren't quite sure, because that slap heard round the world. You know, that was about as believable as it could get.
And the uncertainty is what makes the work shoot promo so great. Like, we all know we're in the game. Okay, we all know what's going on.
Right.
But there's parts of it that's just like, wait, does he mean that for real?
Yeah.
Did he actually feel that?
Yeah.
And that's how you get the reaction.
Yeah, it's like Shawn and Bret when Shawn Michaels made that Sunny Days comment about Bret Hart potentially sleeping with Sunny, which, whether he was or not, I can't say. I wasn't there. I wasn't even there. It was Owen.
But it felt like it was real. It felt like that could have happened.
Yeah, and you know, Shawn being in the state that Shawn was at the time, it's not like he cared whether he brought up backstage garbage or not. You know, he didn't care. And it all depends on timing, because sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And it's just really interesting to see how the right dose of realism at the right time can take pro wrestling and re-energize it, even though everybody knows what's going on. Like you said, we're in the game. But everybody likes to be reminded that it is just a game, but you never know when the reality's going to hit that game.
And how you play the game.
And speaking of, and sometimes how the game officiates, and there's no better way to transition.
That was terrible.
To transition into our match of the week. Roll the intro. What time is it? It's the fight, it's the brawl, it's the match of the week. It's tonight, watch along with the son of a beat. It's one fall, the down for the 1, 2, and 3. So don't stall, hang on to the edge of your seat. We got a punch and a flip and a powerbomb too. All the moves and the stars are all under review. See the babyface cheered and the heels get heat. This is wrestling at its peak. It's the match of the week.
That was terrible.
I know. That's right, folks. It is our match of the week, and we've been talking about CM Punk a lot, so we figured that we would watch a match from the Summer of Punk, where arguably his heat was killed, although I feel like that was Night of Champions more than it was this. But in any event, we've got a very interesting match to talk about. SummerSlam 2011. It is title versus title. Unification of the WWE Championships. John Cena versus CM Punk 2011 with Triple H as the referee to call it down the line as the newly christened COO. What did you think of this match, Sky?
At first, I will admit, I was a bit disappointed we couldn't get Money in the Bank.
Me too, because that match is tremendous.
I mean, it's a 5-star match.
Yeah.
Back when those things meant something.
True.
But I haven't seen this match in years. Watching it back, this was really good.
Yeah.
Like, this was really, really good, and it was surprisingly good because CM Punk and John Cena, they have a lot of chemistry.
They do.
Punk got more out of Cena than I think anyone else.
I think Cena tried harder here than for anyone else. It's not to say that he didn't for for AJ or for Kevin Owens. That's a story for another time. But
or like guys like Edge or Randy Orton.
Yeah, no,
any other one that he's had major rivalries with.
Yeah, but I've never seen Cena chain wrestle quite like this. Cena had a wrestling match with CM Punk, which is not really Cena's MO.
It's kind of like Hogan. Hogan knew how to wrestle. He just chose to be Hogan because that's what the people wanted.
Because that's what sold.
It's the same thing with Cena.
Yeah.
He could wrestle, and he showed he can in this match. It's just that he can be Cena, and he doesn't have to take as many risks.
Right. And what made me laugh so hard is every so often you'd hear a bunch of morons going, "You can't wrestle," as they're like chain wrestling. As John Cena's literally chain wrestling. And they're screaming, "You can't wrestle." It's like, guys, are you not seeing... I mean... And Cena was that kind of over, and this was something that really fascinated me. You remember when we watched that WrestleMania 25 match with Taker and Michaels, where they were so over, and they messed up a whole bunch of stuff, but it didn't matter because they're just so over? Cena was one of the few people who was that level of over, but then all of a sudden just got this magnifying glass on his work and how crisp everything was just because the audience had changed.
Well, let's provide a bit of a context, because the context is important.
As always, context always matters.
So, as we remember, the Pipebomb promo was cut in June of that year, and then they have Money in the Bank in July, and CM Punk wins. We have the famous walk-off.
Yep.
John Cena gets the title back after beating Rey Mysterio after Rey won the title for one night, which...
You mean for a couple hours?
For a couple hours.
Yeah, it wasn't even a night. He didn't even get the Kane treatment. He got I won it at the beginning of the show and lost it by the end of the show.
Exactly, which is stupid.
Ugh.
And then CM Punk returns that night to the song that I horribly sung at the beginning of this podcast.
You did all right.
And we go to SummerSlam with Triple H. And this match, speaking of that Pipebomb promo, there was a lot of things about Triple H being involved. And whether or not he was going to screw over Punk, and whether or not he was going to screw over Cena.
Yeah, and to Triple H's credit, I thought that he did a good job of not really showing a bias throughout the whole match, but I believe that Triple H was the weakest member and weakest part of this match.
Well, that's the thing, though, is that even still, he did things as a referee that no referee does today.
True.
He checked these guys before they started wrestling for any hidden weapons.
Yep. Yeah. Back in the day when Roddy Piper... Because Roddy Piper would have like 9 or 10 that Errol Hebner would have to pull out at the beginning of the match. And that always cracked me up. But it was nice to see Triple H do that.
Like, when's the last time a main roster referee did that?
I can't remember. Charles Robinson maybe at some point, but I don't remember.
Like... The most recent example we could think of was when they did the Cruiserweight Classic, another Triple H creation.
Yep. Well,
but again, not on Raw or SmackDown.
Yeah. No, you wouldn't find that. And then there's little things with Triple H. You know, he did a lot of really good refereeing stuff here, but it was clear he isn't normally a referee. And it was really clear at the very beginning because Triple H had a really hard time positioning himself to stay out of the way from what they were doing. He got better later, but at the very beginning as they were feeling out, he was definitely kind of running around, almost like the referee in WWE 2Ks, where he's kind of like there, and then he kind of runs around and goes to the other side. You could tell he's not used to having to position his body as that tertiary member.
But that's also good because it added to the match. It's like, you can't forget that Triple H is there. And you know he's not a regular referee, so he's not going to do things that regular referees are going to do.
Right.
So that's why it's okay in this case.
Absolutely. And if you're going to have a guest referee interfere, there's no better way to do it than I think the way that he did do it in this match where he was about to count to 10, goes, no, screw this. You guys are going to settle this in the ring, and just throws them both in and then just keeps his hands off them.
The wrestler mentality. You gotta finish it in the ring.
That's right.
It would be sucking if it ended in a count out.
Yeah. No, absolutely. But these guys had a lot of
But we've
very
talked
good
enough
moves.
about Triple H. We have talked enough about Triple H.
Yes. This is about Cena and Punk. And there was a really, really nice bit of chain wrestling where CM Punk had a headlock, but he had grapevined the legs around John Cena, and John was able to just pull Punk's leg out and get his leg like over and around Punk's so that Punk couldn't like get that extra bit of leverage as he was trying to get out. And it was just a really nice piece of wrestling. It was subtle, but it was really nice, and I really appreciated the fact that Punk was able to help John kind of tighten up the wrestling pieces as John helped Punk work through some of the entertainment pieces. Like you said, they gel very well together.
Like, John was on fire in this match, doing the hold for hold with CM Punk. Those transitions between submission moves were very smooth.
That was awesome. As soon as they started doing those like signature sequences being countered, I'm like, these guys are really putting in a quality match.
Right, like Cena was doing his usual shoulder block thing, and he got blocked twice.
Yeah.
He wasn't able to hit it normally. He never hit it normally in this match because he always got stopped at the pass.
Yeah. And it was great. And then, that was also reciprocated, because Punk wasn't able to get a lot of his sequences either, and John would cut him off. And John, that big power out when he had that grapevine into that black hole slam. I'm like, where the hell did that come from?
Fold your clan.
Yeah, I was like, where did that come from? And
New Legacy Inc.
That's right. And it was just, these guys just had a good chemistry, and they gave him lots of time, and they did a great job of pacing this so that it didn't ever get boring or get monotonous. They kept it really going. John's submissions obviously are not as crisp, and every time I see him try to do that STF, where you could just tell that Punk could just kind of like duck his head and he'd be out of it. It does kind of take away and give credence to those idiots chanting, "You can't wrestle." But I was able to forego that.
I like to see those idiots try and get in the ring with John Cena and tell them that he can't wrestle.
And in all fairness to John, John was never going to look as crisp as CM Punk was. But again, Cena is to the point of over where it doesn't really matter, at least in this vacuum. And it also actually kind of made the match better as a result, because it got more of a crowd reaction for CM Punk, which is kind of where they were going anyway.
Right. Now, I will say this. CM Punk's knees all night were nasty.
I wouldn't say they were stiff, but he laid them in.
He laid them in. Like, they were laying their stuff in, and they were doing things that they both normally never do with anyone else besides the men that they were across the ring from. That drop kick by John Cena.
Mwah. Beautiful. Probably the best one I've seen him do.
The best drop kick that John Cena has ever done. Take that, Josh Negedin.
Yeah, that's the one. It's kind of like that top rope natural selection. That's the one John Cena drop kick I will find acceptable. And
exactly. And they do the AA spot and Punk kicks out and John can't believe it. Then they do the GTS spot and Cena kicks out and Punk can't believe it.
Yeah. And here's my thing with that. The AA hardly ever beat anyone with just one from like 2007 all the way to 2018. So I don't get the shock when John Cena can't beat somebody with one AA, because they had already pretty much established that it takes more than one to knock some of these people down.
Which, by the way, I will say this. They've done better recently with protecting finishers.
They have. They definitely have. Because I'm sure somebody emphasized this, especially, the last one I remember being a finisher fest was AJ and John.
Well, yes, that one.
Well, and then Reigns and
Brock Lesnar Goldberg match.
Yeah. That's a fair point. But differently, that's just because that's all those people do or can do. So it's...
Right.
And then this finish. What did you think?
If they were trying to protect Cena so that they could eventually continue the feud, that's fine. I didn't love the finish.
The crowd was definitely tired at the end of this, because this was the main event. So the crowd was tired. They were into it, but they weren't as into it as I remembered. But I think that there was a lot on this 2011 show, if I'm not mistaken. That was very exciting leading up to this.
Right. I mean, they had the Randy Orton-Christian match, which another...
Barn burner.
If it wasn't for Cena and Punk, they would be recognized as the best feud in WWE at the time.
Yeah, that was a hell of a match. I think we've done that as a match of the week, that match, because of how good it was. But this is what hurt this for me. It's not the idea of the finish I don't like. It's the fact that the camera angle with the hard cam really made it look like Triple H could obviously see that Cena's leg was on the ropes. I think Triple H's positioning was bad.
Yeah, and that goes back to the whole he's not really a referee thing.
Yeah, which fairly also adds to the kind of finish thing, but at the same time, it didn't look so much like Triple H goofed because he didn't see it. It made it look like Triple H goofed because that was what he was supposed to do.
Which, again, is just kind of...
It hurt it. It hurt it. I genuinely think it hurt it. And this was just the first of a whole myriad of things that would go on that would eventually have this entire feud ending with Triple H versus Kevin Nash in a sledgehammer on a ladder match.
Russo is so proud of himself for that one.
Which is weirdly surprisingly good. If you go back and watch it, that match is surprisingly good. But anyway.
By the way, did you notice they never showed what happened after the match concluded?
No, with good reason. Because that was the end of the Summer of Punk.
If it wasn't that, it was Night of Champions.
And why they did this?
You know why.
You're right. I do know why.
Because Punk was starting to get over.
I do know why, and they didn't like that, and they wouldn't have that, and Zack Ryder had felt this pain, or would feel this pain very shortly thereafter.
He would feel the pain 3 months after. Once Zack Ryder started getting over, it was over.
Yep.
And once Daniel Bryan started getting over, he turned heel, which arguably made him bigger.
Yep. And then they've been punishing people for getting over ever since. They punished most recently Otis.
I don't think Otis is the one. Like Keith Lee, they punished him for getting
Keith
popular.
Lee too.
They punished Drew McIntyre for getting popular. Now he's in a feud with Jinder Mahal.
Yeah. Well, but they gave Drew a lot prior to propping him down to Jinder Mahal. So I'm a little less inclined to believe that they're punishing Drew for that. More they're just sending him back down because they've spent the whole year with him. But the fact remains that WWE loves to punish wrestlers who get over, and that's 3/4 of the reason why AEW, who does not in fact do that, is gaining momentum. But
that's part of the reason why CM Punk left WWE.
And that's about as good a transition as ever, as we're going to talk about the man who may or may not be coming into AEW very shortly. Our spotlight today is the CM Punk, who had a hell of a career, and its origins are pretty early in at least I believe he started in the late 90s, and then we really started to see him make indie scenes in the early 2000s.
Name his first professional wrestling company?
Oh God, you know what?
You're not going to know it. So
I can't remember.
Lunatic Wrestling Federation, which was a backyard wrestling company in the late mid-90s, using the ring name CM Punk and a tag scene called the Chick Madness with CM Venom.
That I remember hearing that a lot. Whatever happened to CM Venom?
Who knows? By the way, CM Punk, he finally revealed in the court case with Colt Cabana that CM stands for Chick Magnet.
Well,
so we have it on record.
Now we know.
On record.
Now
Chick
we know.
Magnet Punk.
That's something. And now Punk and Cabana might be on the same show. Wonder if they'll do anything with that, but
that's going to be so fucking awkward.
That'll be interesting. But the first time I remember, or the earliest match I remember of CM Punk's that didn't involve TNA, was a triple threat match between him, Rey Mysterio, and Eddie Guerrero. In that weird time period where Eddie got fired because he was dealing with his backstage demons, so he wrestled independently, and Rey had not signed with WWE in 2002 at that point quite yet. So, and Punk was still doing independence, and he was like the one final staple. If you get a chance, if anyone gets the chance, I know that match is on YouTube. Find that match. It is great.
Right, and this was part of IWA Mid-South. And listen to the matches he had as the IWA Mid-South Heavyweight Champion. Matches against Eddie Guerrero, Colt Cabana, AJ Styles, Chris Hero.
Yeah. And all of them were real young at the time.
Right, this is like, we're talking the early 2000s. And his stuff in Ring of Honor against Raven and the Flock.
That's so much. I mean, his Ring of Honor career, the original Summer of Punk. You know,
yes,
and all the while, this was before he went to TNA and did the stuff with Raven's sublet, which was only for like 5 months, wasn't it? It wasn't very long.
Yeah.
It wasn't very long. He was in TNA, probably for the better. And
it was like less than a year.
Yeah. It wasn't it was pretty much a cup of coffee that he stayed for. But then he started really getting traction in Ring of Honor, wrestling Daniels and Joe and Daniel Bryan and all those types of guys.
Remember that match of the week with Raven and who was it against?
It was Raven versus Vampiro.
Yes, and we saw Punk at the end.
Yeah, that's right. That's right, we did. And another one of Vince Russo's fantastically botched and gobbled up finishes.
Yeah.
He's been a theme tonight.
He's had a weird career. Like, he did the stuff at Ring of Honor, and then he go to Ohio Valley Wrestling to wrestle for a little bit.
Well, and what was great about that is that was obviously developmental as he was getting ready to debut on WWE television. And what's interesting is about the original Summer of Punk is that Punk had already signed with WWE, and Ring of Honor ran that angle of Punk saying, well, screw all you guys, but I've got the championship, so, bye. And that eventually led to Samoa Joe taking the belt off him. And so the fact that him signing with WWE was a big enough deal for Ring of Honor to use it in that kind of situation, I think also kind of helped Punk's aura as he came in as a gangster for, was it John Cena?
Yes, it was. at the WrestleMania in Chicago against Triple H.
Yeah, of course. See? These three are just unbelievably intertwined together.
Like, that's the thing about professional wrestling is that when it comes down to it, you're going to run into people over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Like, even in the build-up to this SummerSlam match, Punk mentioned the fact that he was a gangster for John Cena in his entrance.
Yeah. Yeah, and which is why the acknowledgement of the past is sometimes helpful in pushing things forward if you're going to meet somebody a jillion times over the course of your career. And
CM Punk is an interesting guy. So he's not a WWE signing. He's not a big, muscular guy. He's not tall. He's not scary. He's not a Vince McMahon creation. CM Punk's name was allowed to be kept. He didn't change his name.
Yep. But what's interesting is the only reason that Punk was anything in WWE, I firmly believe, is on the shoulders of one man, and that is Paul Heyman. Because ECW comes back at this time, and they need younger talent, and who better fits the bill for ECW, no matter how watered down it is, than CM Punk? He's got the perfect look for an ECW reboot.
And he becomes ECW champion and does stuff in ECW very well.
And Triple H put CM Punk over at that Survivor Series match in 2006 where they just beat the teetotal shit out of Randy Orton and Edge and Mike Knox and who was it? Greg Helms. And who was number 5 in that match?
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. They got absolutely... Johnny Nitro. And they got absolutely demolished. But at the very beginning, as Triple H is doing their thing, he mentioned this is the future of ECW, CM Punk. The CM Punk was getting cheered before Triple H had that. Everyone watches this is a really interesting moment in history, especially considering their relationship going forward. At that time, Triple H was about to do the Are You Ready? And before he could, there were CM Punk chants all throughout the arena. And Triple H was like, that's right, CM Punk, who needs to have a question answered. And CM Punk goes, are you ready? And the crowd goes nuts. Just goes nuts. And this is Punk's like very, very small debut. He had only been in and featured for a few months at that point.
How did he get so over is the question.
Paul Heyman believed in him. And
well, yes, Paul Heyman believed in him, but how did he get over on ECW?
Well, I guess he had the right audience for it. You know, the right blend of people who liked what CM Punk was doing. He certainly had a following from Ring of Honor, but also the people who still believed that ECW was going to be grungier at the time.
But even beyond that, there's a connection to the audience that CM Punk has.
Yeah.
He is so likable and yet so hateable. It's just Punk, when it comes down to it, he connects with the fans better than most wrestlers in the 21st century. He's
got there's definitely a charisma, a captivation about him that makes you interested in him, which is really why we're even talking about him now, especially now he's, his potential return, why it feels so big. Because he's able to do that.
And he had to outgrow ECW, so in 2008, he wins Money in the Bank and becomes the World Heavyweight Champion, pinning Edge after Batista things.
That 2008 run just didn't work. I don't think that Punk was really ready for that. Even though he was good at that point, I still think that was a little too fast for Punk.
2008 wasn't, but 2009.
That created CM Punk. That adding depth into the Straight Edge Society and the stuff he was doing with Jeff Hardy was absolutely brilliant. But it was...
Would you argue it was the best feud of Jeff Hardy and CM Punk's career?
Punk, I don't think so, just because I think what he was doing with Cena long-term was better for Punk. But as far as in-ring is concerned, it's probably up there.
I think it may be Jeff Hardy's best ever feud.
Could be.
He never had the emotion that anyone else had with CM Punk. Like, those matches between Punk and Jeff Hardy, they were some of the most over that Jeff Hardy ever got.
Yeah.
But you can attribute most of it to Punk.
Yeah. Well, he was a great foil for what Jeff was doing at the time, especially considering what Jeff had gone through with him and Edge. And him and Matt that year. Jeff had a very emotional 2009. And I think Punk adding salt onto the wound definitely got Jeff more over because he had gone through so much stuff prior to that point.
And especially because they were the perfect foils for each other. Jeff Hardy, who's been a known user of certain items, and
yes.
CM Punk being straight edge.
Yes. And then the Straight Edge Society forms, which gave Serena Deeb her break, which is a very good thing, considering how great she is.
I just wish it lasted longer.
I wished it had lasted longer. I wish that they didn't run into DX.
Everyone runs into DX.
Because it killed their heat. It totally killed what they were doing. And it's a shame because of what Rey Mysterio... I thought that with CM Punk, his whole thing with Rey Mysterio was brilliant.
And the second time that Dominic got involved in a feud with Rey.
This was peak CM Punk, I think, in WWE. Even though his pipe bomb was going to be just... obviously, his stardom had not peaked. But as far as like what he was developing as a gimmick, his best gimmick work was here. Until he became just him in 2011.
Well, that's the thing, though, is that when CM Punk was a heel at this time, he was the biggest heel in the company.
Yeah.
Everybody hated him.
Yep.
Because he talked the truth, and you hated the fact that he taught the truth, but you knew you couldn't say anything against him.
Yeah. I mean, this is the guy that they believed in so much that he just literally tossed 4 or 5 people out of the ring and just started cutting a promo in the middle of the Royal Rumble. And nobody cared, and everybody was into it.
Everyone was into it, and they hated the fact that he was doing it, but he was doing it.
Yep. And which is why it's kind of like, I kind of am, even though obviously WWE did not respond properly to Punk in general, I kind of feel like in a way WWE did bend over backwards for Punk on a number of occasions. that, and this is kind of an instance of one of those, and it's just, there were a lot of times when, even though Punk may not have liked the creative direction or the slog or the way that he was being treated, there were times that he was given everything he wanted and needed from that company.
Right. And here's a question I have for you.
Yeah.
So Punk leaves the Straight Edge Society and then joins the New Nexus, which let's not get into it.
Let's not get into that.
We don't need to get into it. So we begin the summer of Punk. Did you believe that Punk's contract was actually expiring on July 17th, or do you think it was a work too?
If he hadn't shown up the next night, I would have genuinely believed that he would have left. I think that WWE really flummoxed that up. They should have had Punk go out and wrestle a couple matches elsewhere first. And then say, we'll have you come back, but we'll make it look like you actually left. I feel like that would have really helped CM Punk.
It was 2 weeks, by the way.
It was okay. Well, exactly. 2 weeks to me isn't enough time. If he had gone out and actually...
Yeah, it wasn't enough time to learn a new hold.
Yeah, if he had gone out and actually competed for New Japan Pro Wrestling and went back to Ring of Honor, what would have been the harm in that? 2 matches. Go out there, wrestle 2 matches, and come back.
I know what he should have done. They should have negotiated with New Japan and have him be in the G1.
Yeah, it would have added to the whole allure of the fact that he was not only leaving, but he was leaving with the prize. And it may have actually gotten more people invested in what was going on.
Right, like imagine if CM Punk showed up in New Japan with the WWE Championship competing in New Japan.
But I think that would have been insane. That would have been absolutely insane. You want to talk about Forbidden Door. That would have been next level.
Door right down.
Yeah, that would have been next level. And they tried to do that with TNA and AJ Styles in a couple years later, and I thought that at the very least him defending the TNA belt on New Japan was a good step forward in that. But it's like, it just reminded me of the missed opportunity WWE had there. But I think part of that is that Triple H really wanted to kill CM Punk's heat.
Night of Champions was proof of that.
Yeah, I think Triple H is like, no, you're going to bring him back, and I'm going to bring this guy back down to the level. And I think that...
Which is ironic, because a couple months after Night of Champions, he wins the WWE title and goes on the longest WWE title reign for the modern era at 434 days.
Yeah. And, which also further proves my point that WWE did give him a lot. WWE licensed his music for Cult of Personality. That was big. Vince hates licensing music, I have to imagine, because he does it so little. And, can you imagine how long it was to get No More Words back?
It took until, 5 years to get Jeff Hardy his theme back? They gave Punk his 5 years into his run.
Yeah.
They gave him the face of WWE 13, which... You and me and Joshua have made jokes about that game, but he's the face of a video game.
Yeah. I mean, and I'm not saying that to say that WWE wasn't scummy after Punk had left and, the way that it went, but, you also got to remember from WWE's side, they catered to Punk a lot when Punk made demands, because somebody there obviously saw something in CM Punk.
Yeah, it's just disappointing that his WWE title run, even during that run, it felt like he was second fiddle to John Cena. And it's disappointing.
Yeah. But I also believe that it was not really intentional on that part. I think it's just the way that they really, really, really wanted to push Cena and The Rock. But there's no excuse for him losing to The Rock the year later. No excuse for that. That's where I lean back to CM Punk and kind of lean back into his side of this equation, because there was no justification for making that a title match other than we don't believe in you, CM Punk, because we believe that having a twice-in-a-lifetime match is better, further proving your point in the Pipebomb.
And further proving the point that he has the best match at WrestleMania against The Undertaker, and The Undertaker's last critically acclaimed match, and it was second fiddle to Twice in a Lifetime.
Which wasn't good as good as the first.
Which wasn't as good as the first. That's what happens with sequels.
Yeah. Especially when you bill it as twice in a lifetime, which is the dumbest slogan. It's like the whole point of Once in a Lifetime is not doing the match again. Why not just have The Rock and Punk wrestle at WrestleMania? It's like,
I don't know.
That
should have been the year. You know what? Now that I'm thinking about it, that should have been the year. CM Punk versus The Rock at WrestleMania. John Cena versus The Undertaker.
Boom. Done. Problem solved. And if you want to give The Rock the belt at WrestleMania, that's fine. I wouldn't. But if they wanted to do that, they could do that.
But The Rock won the belt from Punk. If anything, John Cena should have been determined to, you know what? I need to do something to re-energize myself. Because ever since I lost The Rock, I haven't been me. So I challenge The Undertaker, and I will defeat the streak.
Yeah.
And then there's that one. And Punk wants his belt back, so he challenges The Rock for the title.
Yeah. So, you could do that.
And imagine if CM Punk beat The Rock at WrestleMania, how big of a star you would have been.
It would have elevated him, but they had no intention of doing that, obviously. But if you wanted to keep those matches the same without having Punk lose to The Rock and just make the whole thing a load of garbage, I know that Taker was advancing his age at this point, but it wouldn't have been that difficult to transition the belt off him if you wanted Taker to win that. Keep the belt on Punk, and do what they did in 96, I think it was, when they built up Diesel and The Undertaker. Have The Rock have Punk beat, and then Cena screw The Rock over in a title match at the Rumble. Then, on No Way Out, have Cena have Punk beat, and then have The Rock interfere to break up Cena's title match with CM Punk. So then you still have The Rock and Cena facing each other in that twice-in-a-lifetime match, and they have a reason to be mad at each other, but you don't beat CM Punk as the champion in the process.
I know. It's just one of those things where they had a long-term plan for booking, and they chose the long-term plan over something that got over organic in the intermediate.
Yeah, and that was the beginning of the end.
And that was the beginning of the end, because ever since that time, Punk, his later WWE stuff was good, but you could always tell that there wasn't something right with him, especially physically, because he looks like a dejected man. Remember when you were doing that video about a script from SmackDown late that time?
Yes.
And you commented yourself on that video that CM Punk, he didn't look good.
No, he did not. He was in pretty rough shape, and it was obvious to tell. It's easy to detect burnout. He was very burnout.
And that staph infection that he had on his back, that the doctor told him, you could have died. You should be dead, actually.
Yeah, big old lump. Yeah, he's lucky that he didn't. But then, like we were saying before, something's got to give. And, I have no blame, especially when you're going to get told after losing to The Rock the year prior that you're going to wrestle Triple H at Mania. As if that would help Punk at all. And I know Triple H always thought himself as the final boss. And Punk was the first to be like, you know what? No, you're not. The only reason that you want to play that we're working together is that you need me, so you have a WrestleMania match.
Right, and it's one of those things where Punk's like, you didn't pay me as much, even though I had a better match at WrestleMania than The Undertaker. I've never gotten a main event when I should. I've always been the second fiddle to John Cena, even though I've been outselling him.
And then they work, and then they decide, he decides to leave, and then they fire him on his wedding day. Because they're petty.
He took his ball and he walked home.
And, I was definitely conflicted about it at the time, but I definitely see both sides of the equation in that respect. I still think WWE was more in the wrong than not, because I do see a lot of what CM Punk was talking about. It's very obvious to see that it was being manifested not only in the ring, but outside of it. But at the same time, I feel like there was part of the biting the hand that did bring you to the dance at that point. But WWE was changing at that point. It was getting a lot more regimented, a lot more scripted, and a lot less willing to get guys over.
Do you think with CM Punk, now here's the thing. He was the last real professional wrestling star.
Yeah.
And here's what I mean by that.
Yeah.
He's the last guy who said, you know what? I'm not putting up with this crap. And you can't make me do it. Because I don't want to do it.
Yeah, and wasn't just a whiny bitch-ass baby like Austin Aries.
And wasn't a bitch ass. Well, I mean, Austin Aries was never the star that CM Punk was. But
Right.
That's beside the point.
Unless you talk to him about it.
But CM Punk is the last guy who told WWE, I'm not doing this and you can't make me do this.
Yeah.
And that's part of why he has such an allure now in professional wrestling and why he's such a big mystique figure.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's to the point where, for better or for worse, because Lord knows what AEW is going to do with him, I'm interested. I'm interested to see where this goes.
I'm just disappointed because he said that he didn't want to be a part of bad TV anymore. So if he joins AEW, whether or not people love him or not in AEW, you and I both know it's bad TV.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm not, obviously, if you like AEW, I'm not telling you shouldn't watch it, because there are some good redeeming qualities to it. I'm not saying there aren't. I personally think that they're just buried under so much filler and garbage that you can't see them properly.
And while it's clear that Daniel Bryan is doing it for the art of wrestling, we know Punk's doing it for the money.
But if someone is going to offer him $10 million to work 3 matches, would you not take that money? I mean,
I'll take that money and run with it.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't fault Punk, for better or worse, what's going to happen with Punk. We're just going to have to see. We're going to have to find out what's going on here. But, folk, I think that's about as good a place to close as any, because we're going to see what happens with CM Punk in just a couple weeks' time. But we've got more to do here on the Court-Martail podcast, and it is right now time to take our first commercial break. When we get back, we're going to have another jam-packed podcast for you, ladies and gentlemen. Another match of the week, another topic, another set of news, all for you here on Monday nights. And with any luck, either at the end of this week or the beginning of next week, we will also have the first in our Rebooking Calamity series. And we decided to start, after fielding the questions, we're going to start with Victory Road 2011. How do you book yourself around the world title match when your champion is as inebriated as all hell and by no right should ever have made it out onto television? I will explain to you how it can be done. But before we get to that, we've got to take a break. Sky, thank you very much for being on this show, our debut head-to-head program. And I'd like to say we did a pretty decent job of talking about a guy and a whole series of topics that make things at least energizing to listen to.
And hey, that means we don't have to watch Monday Night Raw, which is even better.
That's even better. So every little silver lining that you can come from, we've got here at the Court-Martail podcast. Sky, I will see you next week.
And I will see you next week.
And we will see all of you next week. Thank you very much for watching, and we will be right back right after this.